Now, the terrorists have to only get lucky once. We have to be right 100% of the time. How can you achieve those goals when you eliminate the very essence of the funding that we learned on September 11th? Who came to respond on that fateful day? It wasn't the federal government. It was local police and firefighters and emergency management and hospital personnel. That's who came. And what does this budget do? It slashes the living daylights out of those very first responders who are critical to our domestic security. What does it do about one of the gaping wounds that we have in the country in terms of security? It slashes port security. Now, everybody who comes into this Capitol has to go through a security device. 100%. Everybody goes to the White House has to go through a security device. 100%. But when we talk about cargo coming from all over the world, only 5% has to go through a scanning process. And yet we're going to cut port security by 50%. You know, mass transit. The Congress spoke in the last session and put mass transit up there because understanding that we saw what happened in Madrid and Mumbai and other places in the world, and yet the President cuts mass transit security by 56%. So those who argue that we cannot talk about the consequences of our engagement in Iraq in a financial context here at home, well, in the context of security here at home, at a time of a regrouping and re-strengthening of Al-Qaeda in the Pakistan-Afghanistan border with the abilities to ultimately commit terrorism domestically in the United States, yes, there is a real causal connection and a real consequence, and we have to include that as part of the debate and part of the consequences in our continuing engagement in Iraq in an open-ended way. Now, with what we heard the Secretary of Defense talk about, with the amount of money the Secretary of Defense thinks we might spend in Iraq next year, in a different context, we could have more than doubled our package to stimulate the economy this year. When Americans get rebate checks in a month or so, they should imagine them more than twice as big, because that's what this year in Iraq would cost. If we want to imagine the total financial cost of the war in Iraq over almost 5 years, if we want to imagine what $608 billion means, we could divide that up and send every American a check for $2,000. If we want to know what the war will cost over the next decade if we continue the course that we are on, that's about $2.8 trillion. Every American should picture a check for more than $9,000. That's what the war costs. More than $9,000 for every man, woman, and child living in the United States of America. If there are 4 people in your family, that's $36,000 that potentially could have been put in your family's economy. When so many hardworking families are struggling to keep their homes, when so many are struggling to help keep with the rising cost of health care and college tuition and heating oil, when so many have to care for aging parents, put food on the table, and struggle to make ends meet each month, $36,000 would go a long way. So it's a different way of looking at it. There are many different ways of looking at the cost of the war. So here's how it all adds up. We can't think about economic stimulus without thinking about how we can stimulate peace. We can't heal our economy without closing the financial hemorrhage that is the war in Iraq. And you know, it seems to me that in addition to those financial contexts, there's the whole question of security. The security I just talked about in a domestic capacity, the security challenges we have by overextending our troops in such a way in which all of our military leadership speaks about the challenges that we would have if we had to meet another security challenge in the world. And basically an understanding that, God forbid, we had another security challenge while we are still engaged in Iraq in the way in which we are engaged, while we have a resurgence in Afghanistan of the Taliban, with some of the latest report talking about some very fierce fighting, and the lack of response by NATO, and a pumping up of our troops there, and looking at that scenario, and now looking at the Afghanistan-Pakistan border where Al-Qaeda has reconstituted, and that's, God forbid, if anything else happens in the world. That's our challenge in a security context if we continue the course. A challenge that those who have the military prowess tell us that we cannot meet if we continue in this way. For 5 years, the administration has parroted the line that, quote, we're fighting them over there, so we don't have to fight them here. But now more than ever, we realize that one of the biggest impacts of the war has been we're spending our money over there, and therefore we cannot spend it here. Money that includes billions of dollars that have been misspent, including hundreds of millions of dollars in reconstruction projects that are unaccounted for. And I came back from Iraq about a month ago, and I must say, when I see schools going wanting here in America, when I see hospitals closing in my home state, when I see roads that have deteriorated, bridges that have fallen, and say reconstruction in Iraq, but no construction here at home. Real consequences of the war. When I see us talk about the genocide in Darfur, and we are universally committed to the proposition, never again, never again. What does never again mean? That we will not repeat the legacies of the past, the failures of the past, in the Holocaust, in Rwanda, in the Armenian genocide. No, we will act. And yet, because of our present security challenges and the consequences of being engaged in Iraq in the way that we are, we stand by and watch people in Darfur be slaughtered. So much for never again. Madam President, not long ago, about a month ago or so, I had the chance to make a trip to Iraq myself. First and foremost, the trip proved something I've believed for a long time. We should be incredibly proud of the men and women who wear the uniform of the United States and who are serving there. They don't ask whether this is the right or wrong mission. They just serve with honor and integrity, and they risk their lives every day. And I came away extremely impressed anew with their commitment, and I felt honored to be able to share some time with them, including many from my home state of New Jersey who are serving there. And so we need to give them a mission worthy of their sacrifice. I believe that's what Senator Feingold's amendment does. Beyond that, one other thing became very clear to me. The solutions to Iraq's problems lie in the hands of the Iraqis. We cannot achieve peace. We cannot achieve reconciliation. We cannot achieve power sharing. We cannot get Sunni, Shia, and Kurd to sit side by side at the point of a military gun. And as long as we continue to, in essence, be enablers of Iraqi leadership that has become so dependent on the United States and refuses to meet the challenges of the hard choices, compromises, negotiations necessary for their government to ultimately achieve, they will never ever feel the urgency of now.